I sat in the cold, sterile hospital room, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My 2-year-old twins, Ethan and Noah, played quietly in the corner, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. The pain in my abdomen was getting worse, sharp and relentless, but it was nothing compared to the disappointment burning in my chest. "Michael, don't ask us to cancel our plans again," my mother's voice rang through the speaker, laced with irritation. "We've had this dinner reservation for months. The entire neighborhood will be there." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Mom, I don't have anyone else to watch the boys. I just got admitted for internal bleeding. The doctors say I need emergency surgery." There was a pause, but it wasn't out of concern. I could almost hear my father sighing in the background, ready to lecture me about responsibility. "You always have some crisis going on," he finally said. "Michael, you're a grown man. You should have planned for things like this instead of expecting us to drop everything." I clenched my jaw, trying to steady my voice. "I give you money every month, Dad. I've helped cover your mortgage, your car payments. The least you could do is—" "We never asked you to," my mother snapped. "You offered. And we're retired now, Michael. We deserve to enjoy our lives." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had been sending them $2,500 every month to help them out after they retired early. I did it out of love, out of duty. But now, when I needed them the most, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. A nurse walked in, checking my IV. She glanced at me with sympathy, probably hearing every word of the conversation. I felt humiliated, exposed. "Mom." "Dad," I said slowly, forcing my voice to stay even. "This isn't about some casual favor. This is my life. My kids. I need you." "You'll figure it out," my father said flatly. "You always do." And then, they hung up. For a few seconds, I just sat there, staring at the dark screen of my phone. The beeping of the hospital monitors filled the silence. My stomach twisted, not just from the pain, but from the undeniable truth staring me in the face. They didn't care. Not really. I had spent years bending over backward for them, believing that family meant sacrifice. That if I kept giving, they would finally see me as someone worth loving, worth prioritizing. I had been a fool. A sharp knock on the door pulled me back to reality. My doctor stepped in, holding a clipboard, his expression serious. "Michael, we need to operate immediately. You're losing blood faster than we expected." My mind raced. I couldn't leave Ethan and Noah alone. But leaving them with my parents? That was no longer an option. I took a deep breath, pushing past the pain. I need to make a call first. Because in that moment, I made a decision. I would never beg them for anything again. The fluorescent hospital lights buzzed softly above me as I tried to steady my breathing. The painkillers were dulling the worst of my agony, but they couldn't numb the betrayal eating away at me. I turned to the nurse who had been checking my IV. Her name tag read Valerie, and her expression was filled with quiet sympathy. She had heard everything. I cleared my throat. I can't leave my kids with them." My voice was rough, but there was no hesitation. "Is there any way the hospital can help me find someone?" She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Actually, I know someone. My friend Olivia is a professional nanny. She used to work at a children's hospital with trauma cases. She's great with kids." A professional nanny. Someone trained to care for children in tough situations. Someone I could actually trust. "How soon can she get here?" I asked. "I'll call her now," Valerie said. As she stepped out of the room, my phone vibrated in my hand. A message from my mother. "Michael, don't do anything rash. We'll talk later." Talk? Now she wanted to talk? I let out a slow exhale, gripping my phone tightly. I had been blind for too long. I tapped my banking app, my fingers shaking slightly, not from pain, but from the realization that I had spent years funding people who wouldn't even lift a finger for me in my worst moment. I cancelled every automatic transfer to their account. Next, I opened my messages and started typing. I will no longer be supporting you financially. My children and I deserve better than being your afterthought. Do not contact me again. I hit send. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. I expected regret. Maybe guilt. Maybe second thoughts. But as I stared at my phone, watching the message delivered notification appear beneath my final words to my parents, I felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. I felt something. Relief. A deep, unexpected sense of freedom settled in my chest, so foreign that it almost felt uncomfortable. For years, I had been drowning in an obligation that was never mine to carry. Paying their bills. Covering their bad financial decisions. Acting like the responsible one while they spent without consequences. And now? Now, I was done. The door opened, and Valerie stepped in. Olivia's on her way. She said she'll be here in 20 minutes. I exhaled, nodding. Thank you. Really? She hesitated, then gave me a small smile. You did the right thing, you know. Setting boundaries. I wanted to believe that. But a part of me, some deeply ingrained part, still whispered that family was supposed to take care of each other. That maybe I was wrong for cutting them off so completely. Then I remembered. I remembered my 10th birthday when my father promised he'd take me to a baseball game but backed out last minute because his coworker had extra golf passes. I remembered sitting alone at my high school graduation because they were on a cruise. I remembered when my wife died, and I was drowning in grief, and they told me to man up instead of offering help. They had never been my safety net. They had only ever been a weight I carried. The door swung open again, this time with a doctor and 2 nurses behind him. All right, Michael. Let's get you prepped. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight finally lift. I was ready. The last thing I remembered before the anesthesia pulled me under was my boys. Ethan and Noah, laughing in the living room. Ethan's obsession with dinosaurs. Noah's habit of clutching my shirt when he was tired. And the thought that hit me harder than the impending surgery, what if I didn't wake up? The world faded to black. When I opened my eyes again, everything felt slow. Blurry. My throat burned, my limbs were heavy, but I was alive. I turned my head slightly, and there they were. Ethan and Noah sat on the small couch near my hospital bed, their tiny legs swinging as they played with their toys. And beside them, reading a children's book out loud, was Olivia. Her voice was soft, soothing, and for the first time in what felt like years, I realized something. My kids were safe. She glanced up and saw me stirring. A relieved smile crossed her face. Welcome back, Michael. I swallowed, my voice hoarse. How long? About 5 hours. 5 hours. 5 hours where I had been completely vulnerable, unable to protect my kids. And yet, they were happy, cared for, and not once had I needed to rely on my parents. A deep breath filled my lungs, painful, but freeing. Maybe, just maybe, I was finally on the right path. Recovery was slow. Every movement sent a dull ache through my body, but it was bearable. The real change wasn't physical. It was mental. For the first time in years, I wasn't the only one carrying the weight. Olivia had seamlessly stepped in, making sure my boys were fed, entertained, and safe. She didn't just do her job, she cared. And that meant more to me than I could put into words. A few days after surgery, when I was stable enough to sit up on my own, I finally reached for my phone. 47 missed calls. 32 messages. All from my parents. I hesitated, then started scrolling through the texts. The first ones were angry. "You can't just cut us off like this. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You being selfish, Michael." Then, the tone shifted. "We need to talk. Please, don't do this. Your father and I are struggling." And finally, the truth. "We're behind on the mortgage. If you don't help us, we could lose the house." There it was. Not once did they ask about my health. Not once did they check on their grandkids. All they cared about was money. I stared at the screen, a strange sense of peace settling over me. This was the moment I had been afraid of for years. Letting them go. But now, it didn't scare me at all. I turned off my phone. And I didn't look back. A few days after I turned off my phone, I finally felt strong enough to leave the hospital bed for short walks around the room. Olivier was still there, keeping an eye on Ethan and Noah like they were her own. I should have felt alone. But I didn't. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bending over backward to keep people who didn't deserve me. That's when the knock came. A hesitant, unsure knock. I frowned and glanced at Olivia. She gave me a questioning look but stayed quiet. "Come in," I called out. The door swung open, and there stood Emily. My sister. Her arms were crossed, and the irritation on her face was obvious. "What the hell, Michael?" she snapped. "Mom and Dad are freaking out. They said you just cut them off with no explanation." "Of course they did." I sighed, already exhausted. "Emily, sit down." She hesitated but eventually did. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to be mad, but she was also confused. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her everything. About how I begged them to help me while I was in the hospital. About how they dismissed me like I was nothing. About how they only started calling me when they realized the money had stopped coming in. Emily's expression shifted as she listened. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. That can't be right," she muttered. "They said you were just being dramatic about some minor procedure." I let out a humorless laugh. "Minor procedure? Emily, I almost died." Silence. Then, a flicker of realization crossed her face. They lied to her. Manipulated her. Just like they always had. She stood up abruptly, shaking her head. I need to go. Emily. I need to talk to them," she said quickly. "If what you're saying is true." She trailed off, already reaching for her phone. I didn't stop her. Because for the first time, someone else was finally seeing them for who they really were. The room was quiet after Emily left. Too quiet. Ethan and Noah were asleep, curled up next to each other on the small hospital couch. Olivia had stepped out to grab some coffee, leaving me alone with my thoughts. And for the first time in days, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt. I was just done. All my life, I had been running in circles, trying to be the good son, the responsible one, the one who fixed their messes. But no more. My phone buzzed on the table. I hesitated before reaching for it. A message from Emily. "You were right. They lied to me. I don't know what to do with that." I stared at the words, letting them sink in. They had finally pushed too far. Even Emily saw them for who they were now. I typed back, "You don't have to do anything. Just take care of yourself." Because that's what I was finally doing. For once in my life, I was putting myself and my kids first. And it felt damn good. Walking through my front door after being in the hospital felt surreal. The same apartment. The same furniture. The same toys scattered across the floor. But I wasn't the same. I had changed. Olivia helped settle Ethan and Noah, making sure they had their favorite stuffed animals before tucking them into bed. I stood there for a moment, watching her. She had done more for my kids in a few days than my parents had in years. "Michael," she said gently, breaking me out of my thoughts. "You okay?" I exhaled. "Yeah. Just adjusting." She nodded, understanding without needing an explanation. The peace didn't last long. An hour later, while I was sitting in my living room, my phone buzzed again. Another message from my mother. "We're coming over. We need to talk." I didn't even have time to process it before there was a knock at the door. Not a polite one. A demanding, impatient pounding. I didn't move at first. Then, slowly, I stood up and walked toward the door. Through the peephole, I saw them. My parents. Standing outside, looking frustrated, entitled, like they actually believed they had a right to be here. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. This was it. The final confrontation. And for the first time, I was ready. I opened the door. My parents stood there, dressed in expensive coats, looking more frustrated than concerned. For a split second, I wondered if they'd say something about my recovery. Maybe a simple, "How are you feeling?" They didn't. Instead, my mother sighed dramatically. "Michael, this has gone on long enough." My father nodded, crossing his arms. "We need to talk about this ridiculous financial situation." There it was. No apology. No concern for me or my kids. Just money. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "There's nothing to talk about." My mother's eyes widened. "Michael, we're behind on our mortgage. We had to cancel our vacation. Do you know how humiliating that was?" I almost laughed. Humiliating? They had left me alone in a hospital bed, bleeding internally, and they wanted to talk about their vacation? "You made your priorities clear," I said calmly. "You chose your lifestyle over your family. Now you're dealing with the consequences." My father's face darkened. "That's not fair, Michael. We worked hard our entire lives. We deserve some comfort." "So did I," I shot back. "And I almost died alone because you couldn't miss one dinner." Silence. For the first time, I saw something flicker in my mother's expression, not guilt, but realization. I wasn't their backup plan anymore. I wasn't their safety net. I was done. My father exhaled sharply. "You're making a huge mistake." I shook my head. "No. I finally stopped making them." And with that, I closed the door. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. I expected some kind of emotional backlash after closing the door on my parents. Regret, second thoughts, something. But there was nothing. Just peace. A few weeks passed, and I heard through Emily that my parents had lost the house. The bank took it. Their perfect life? Gone. But instead of admitting their mistakes, they did exactly what I expected. They blamed me. They told the entire family that I had abandoned them. That I was an ungrateful son who turned his back when they needed me most. But this time? Nobody believed them. Emily had already told the truth. Everyone knew what really happened. And I didn't care about their lies anymore. I had my boys. I had people who truly cared. Olivia was still around, helping when I needed it, slowly becoming someone I could truly rely on. And most importantly? For the first time in my life, I was free. And I was never looking back.